Welcome to Coffee and History, a conversation with Alabama Heritage. We are your hosts. I'm Rebecca Mender.
And I'm Susan Reynolds.
Join us as we sit down with some of the most fascinating folks in the Alabama community as we bring you the stories of Alabama that educate, inspire, and we hope entertain. Susan, I just got back from a trip from Louisiana.
You did?
And every time I go down to the coast, and especially South Alabama, I think of our guest today.
Yeah.
And so I looked up a fun fact about that area just for our Did You Know segment. So I'm going to ask you, did you know that the Gulf Coast villages of Bayou, Batre, and Coden are two of Alabama's most distinctive, with roots going back to the French settlement in the 18th century?
I did not.
I know a lot of that part of the area has so much French influence. And so I can see that, but what I found interesting is in the 1970s, they also had refugees from Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos that flooded that entire area, and it completely changed the dynamic, and I think they were like a third of the population.
That I did know.
So that I didn't know, so I thought that was very cool. I mean, that's a very fun area of our state. It's a beautiful area of our state. It's always fascinated me, and I'm sure that our guest today probably knows more about that area.
This is true, and our guest today actually lives in that area of Mobile Bay. He is the former writer-in-residence at the University of South Alabama and former Southern editor at the Charlotte Observer. He is the author of more than 30 books that explore themes of social justice and Southern music, religion, politics, and culture. Several of his books have been adapted into public television documentaries, and his writing has earned him numerous literary and humanitarian awards, including his recent induction into the 2025 Alabama Writers Hall of Fame. Please welcome to our podcast, author and historian and our friend, Frye Gaillard.
Thanks, guys. Good to see you.
Welcome, Frye. We're so happy to have you here.
Thank you so much.
Yes, definitely. And Frye, tell us a little bit more about those Mobile Bay villages that Rebecca was referring to. They have such a rich history.
Yeah, they go back, I think the founding date was 1789 for Bayou, Batre, and Coden. They're sort of, they blur into each other. I mean, there's not a really hard demarcation between them. And you know, there are these wonderful sort of fishing villages on the Alabama coast. The original land grant was to the Poarch family. And if you look at the phone book in Bayou, Batre, the most numerous name is probably still Poarch.
Wow.
So that tells you something about the deep roots and the sense of history that place has. Actually, co-authored a little book about that area that was published by the University of Alabama Press.
In the Path of the Storms.
In the Path of the Storms,
That's right.
yeah. So, you know, it was, and then I live in Coden, or at least that's my mailing address. I live on kind of the outskirts of it. So it's fun.
That's really cool. Have you ever heard of the Pelican Girls?
Yes, but I can't tell you
Yeah,
that
I just know
story.
it has the French connection, and we've got that article coming up in a couple of years, actually.
Okay.
Well,
It's scheduled for a while, but
it's scheduled
Right.
for Alabama Heritage, which is a quarterly magazine, and you can subscribe to it at alabamaheritage.com.
shameless plug.
Yes. Well, you know, the last time I drove through Bayou, Batre, we had a former student who was a student assistant with us, and she lived in that area. Y'all might even know each other. I don't know what the population is in that area, but she would always talk about, you know, she'd say, yeah, I'm from Mobile. And I'm like, no, you're really not from Mobile.
Right.
So I try to teach these students who work for us, you know, or students that I teach, have taught, I explain to them, you know, be proud of your community. Don't say you're from Mobile if you're not. If you're from Bayou, Batre, then say that, because, I mean, that's actually, you know, a kind of a sexy name. Bayou, Batre is like, it's very intriguing.
Yes,
You know,
it
it's
is,
like,
yeah.
well, wow, where is that? Are you from Louisiana? It's like, no, actually, I'm from Alabama. You know, but we drove through there, and I was shocked because there was like every block, there was a sign that said, fresh shrimp. So-
There's no shortage of shrimp down there. So
Yeah, I mean, but it made us happy because, we'd load up and bring
Yeah.
a whole bunch home with
Yeah.
us on our
It's
way
good-
back from a
good
beach
call.
trip,
Yes, right.
Well, you had mentioned In the Path of the Storms, and that book was published by UA Press, and it was when I used to work at the press, and I think that was the first time I had exposure to the greatness of Frye Gaillard.
Well, didn't we do an AH article on that too?
You did.
Yeah, and I think that was my first experience.
Was it really?
with Frye.
Oh my
Yeah.
God, up top!
Right.
So there we go, there's another common thread we have.
Yeah,
you know?
exactly.
That's really
Yeah,
funny, because
it
that was
is.
like 2000.
I was not your editor though, I don't think.
No, but that was my first article
Oh,
for
that's so
Alabama
funny.
Heritage. Yeah.
Aw.
That was what, 2008 or 2000?
I think so. Right after Hurricane Katrina.
Right.
Because it was Bayou, Batre was sort of the eastern end of the devastation of
Right.
Hurricane Katrina.
And that's kind of what that book was about, right?
It was, yeah.
Yeah, and then the photography in there. Now, what was special about that book with the photography?
Well, two artists from those communities, Sheila Hagler and Peggy Denniston, that it was their work that was in there. Plus, there was some student photography in there as well.
Nice.
So it was, it was a community-based book. Really.
Yeah, that's a great kind of project, and I think that was really special. But that's so funny that was our first acquaintance.
It is. I distinctly remember that article, but we did not work together until later. But that one, I do remember it.
Well,
I was pretty new to the magazine when that one came
And I was
out.
pretty new to the press. I was like, I don't know what I'm doing, but this guy sounds pretty good. I'm gonna fangirl him and follow him for years. Well, I know, I think it was the very next year after that is when we actually have a copy of your Civil Rights Trail book here for those who are watching us on YouTube. And so you and I did a multi-city, multi-day bus tour.
We did.
And we try to hit some of the highlights that you mentioned in your Civil Rights Trail guide. And there was some very powerful moments that occurred, and I had to do a lot of the behind the scenes detail, but I know that a lot of people who took part in that trail ride were very moved by what they experienced. Is there anything that you really recall? I know I'm asking you something that happened almost 20 years ago, so but is there anything that from that tour that kind of highlighted the whole event for you?
Well, it's such a rich and powerful history, I think, and anybody that takes a tour of the civil rights sites in Alabama is going to be, I think, moved at some point along the way. I think we met some of the people from Selma and other places.
Yeah.
If I'm remembering correctly, one of the people that we met in Selma was Joanne Bland.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
And Joanne was 12 years old when she marched on Bloody Sunday.
Right.
And her memories of it were the memories of a 12-year-old kid, which she shared. I mean, she saw an old woman get knocked to the pavement, and she imagined that she could hear over the screams the old woman's head hitting the pavement. But in fact, she realized later it wasn't that. It was her own head hitting the pavement because she fainted from the horror of the whole scene as a 12-year-old kid. So, and so, that's pretty powerful stuff to hear people who were there and who remember it that way, and to be a 12-year-old in that melee, which was horrifying to the whole country because the whole country saw it. It was on the news that night, and so I think that was one story that was particularly moving to me, and to watch people react to that. Getting to walk across the Edmund Pettus Bridge is always a powerful experience. And then, there's stuff in Birmingham, and then I remember we also went to little places like Notasulga, where one of the first Rosenwald schools, which was a project that Booker T. Washington at Tuskegee and the philanthropist Julius Rosenwald came up with to build schools for African American kids early in the 20th century.
Yeah.
In communities that didn't have schools for
Right.
African American kids. So, you know, so much history.
Right. Well, I noticed that I was looking in a newspaper. There's a really tiny newspaper that is a weekly. It's called the Greensboro Watchman. And this is from it's about a week ago. But obviously this podcast will be aired much later in the year. But it's Oak Grove has a Rosenwald school. And it looks like what they have been doing is been spending the last few years preserving it. So I guess they've got some funding and to help preserve that school, and they were going to do like a big, open house so everybody could come see it. And so they're calling it one of Hale County's most important historic landmarks. So to me, it's really great to see that people are still recognizing the importance of these buildings and these structures and the history behind them. So that's Oak Grove that has the new one coming, being reopened.
Yeah, that's really great.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And you've written for us about Rosenwald schools before too. So again, come to Alabama Heritage. We can definitely give you some of links to Frye's articles.
Look, if you love our podcast, you'll love our print magazine.
You sure will. You sure will. It doesn't get better. But so you've written lots of books for civil rights. Obviously, are a big part of the theme of the book and the focus. So Cradle of Freedom, for example, where you cover many of the events in Alabama during that time period. What about that book was sort of like a turning point for you, or something special about that writing experience?
Well, I had a chance to interview, I think, about 100 people for that book, many of whom, I would say even most of whom, were like foot soldiers in the movement. So a lot of people that you might not have heard of, a lot of people I had not heard of. And they were so eager to tell their stories. They were so eager to be heard and to know that the history that they were part of was valued. And so I wanted to tell the story of Alabama's central role in the civil rights movement, but tell it as a story. Not like a dry piece of history, but as a story populated by ordinary flesh and blood people, ordinary people doing extraordinary things, which happen time and time again. People summoned a kind of courage and grace and wisdom and strength in those days. And I call the book Cradle of Freedom because you could argue that the events in Alabama helped make all of us more free, whether we're black or white. I mean, prejudice and racism and segregation and all of those were blights and burdens for everybody in the state, I argue. And while most of the heroes of the story were African American, not all of them, but most, nevertheless, it's a story that belongs to all of us.
Right.
And so I was really grateful to be able to work for the University of Alabama Press on that book, and it did get some attention. It won the Lillian Smith Book Award, which is for Southern writers is a high honor.
It's a big deal.
Yeah,
yes.
it's a big deal. Definitely. Yeah, that's
So,
fascinating.
you just don't fall into something like this because this is not what your dad did, for example. And so when it comes to a career path, just thinking about what got you interested in writing, and then especially at what age did you decide that civil rights is something that I want to focus on?
I came of age in the 1960s.
Okay.
I went from being a junior high school kid to starting my career at the ends, the beginning of the decade. I was in the 8th grade, I think. When the decade ended, I just graduated from college and was beginning my work as a journalist and a writer. And in between, there were a number of things that happened where civil rights was just so front and center, so center stage in the life of the state. And I had an experience on a high school field trip when I was a junior in high school My hometown was Mobile, and we came to Birmingham on a field trip, and we walked out of our hotel room, and there, as far as from me to you, I mean 3-4 feet away, Dr. King was being arrested, Martin
Wow.
Luther King, and he was being shoved up the sidewalk by these 2 Birmingham policemen.
Did you know who he was at that time?
I did know
Okay.
who he was, but I had not had occasion before then to think as much as I should have
Right.
about civil rights and, you know, the issue of race and all of those things. I was a kid
Right.
and raised in privilege in Mobile, and, you know, just
Was your dad an attorney? Is that what
he
it
was. He was
Okay.
an attorney, and then he was a judge.
Okay.
And so he
And
was.
you were like, that's not the life for me.
Well, yeah, pretty much.
Too
Yeah.
much college, right?
Too much college, and I don't know. I was supposed to be a lawyer.
Mhm.
You know, everybody in my family was lawyers. You know,
Oh,
my
so
father,
you're the
my
rebellion
uncle,
one.
but you know, I just was never drawn to that.
Right.
And then after seeing Dr. King being arrested and being sort of jarred by it, you know, because I looked into his eyes as he passed by me, and I was struck by how sad and expressive they were, you know.
Right.
And all of a sudden I didn't have the words for it then, but it was like history had a face,
Yeah.
you know. And it was literally the face of Martin Luther King, and that just stayed with me. I didn't even talk about it for a long time to people. It was like I was privately thinking, what do I make of this?
Right.
Why is this so deeply disturbing? And then I went off to college, to Vanderbilt, and got there the first year that African American undergraduates were there, and so there were lots of really interesting conversations with those young people, and they were so impressive,
Right.
you know. And so within a year or two, that was just my preoccupation, you know.
Were you involved, or were you in North Carolina during their sit-ins, or why do I have a connection there? Was it when you were with the Charlotte Observer, or I've got this weird connection with
Yes.
you in the Carolinas?
Yes.
Explain to me what's coming into my head that not very clearly.
Well, I went to work in 1972 for the Charlotte Observer.
Okay.
And somewhere along the way, on an anniversary of the Greensboro sit-in in 1960, I was assigned to interview the Greensboro Four, these 4 young guys who were college freshmen at North Carolina A&T, and they just spontaneously decided to sit in at the Woolworth store the next day, you know, the lunch counter, because they were feeling bad that they hadn't done anything personally to oppose segregation, which they hated.
Right.
And so they just went the next day. Well, you know, I interviewed these guys, and they were fascinating people, you know, and they had really good detailed memories about exactly what it felt like to take their seats on the white people's stools.
And this was in the 70s.
Well, I was writing it in the 70s, but the sit-in happened in 1960. So it was a historical piece, really, for the newspaper, an anniversary, because they decided to go back and, you know, they had scattered to the 4 winds, the 4 of them, and they would get together and come back and eat at that Woolworths. It's just kind of, and so I wrote about them coming back. I think it's probably the first time they had ever gathered there again, if I recall correctly.
I mean, do you ever, I know civil rights is not the only topic you obviously write about. You just have written a lot about it.
Right.
But to me, I just wonder, how heavy is this burden? I mean, it just seems like if you're always constantly writing about these struggles, and here we are not necessarily better off than we were, 60 years ago, how do you process all of that without, just wanting to get up and scream?
Well, I do.
It's very frustrating to tell the stories of the people who went and did all this effort, and then not much has come of that.
I do want to scream sometimes.
Yeah.
And, you know, I thought this would be a topic that I would have moved past by now. I thought it would recede into sort of safe history in a way, that we could all agree that, you know, racism and segregation and inequality of the degree that we had known them back in those days was wrong. And, you know, we wouldn't have to keep telling that story. I mean, you could tell it, but it wouldn't have to be a major preoccupation. That was sort of, maybe that's a white hope, I don't know, but I expected to move on pretty thoroughly to other topics, and I just couldn't, you know. I mean, when President Obama was elected, I thought, oh, we have reached a plateau where we can, you know, where we can elect a person of color president of the United States. And I expected that there would be disagreements with some of his policies, and there always are with any president. But, you know, there was this backlash against him that was so ugly and so racist.
Well, there was the tan suit.
The tan suit incident.
Even though Ronald Reagan did wear a tan suit also.
Yeah, I mean, and you think about it, I mean, how stupid that people made a big deal of. I mean, it was a nice looking suit. I mean, come on, you know. And so that's when the warning lights went on again for me. Like this issue is not over. And so writing about the current manifestations of it was something I wanted to do, but I also thought there was perspective in the history, and so continuing to write about that seemed worthwhile.
And you guys kind of did that with the Cynthia Tucker, and you did that with the Southernization of America.
Right.
And that was published by New South, I believe.
It was published by New South, and came out, I believe it was 2022.
Yeah.
So.
And so that was an interesting, because I think Susan and I both went to a conversation that you both had at a local Ernest and Hadley booksellers here in Tuscaloosa.
Right. Yes.
And it's just an interesting concept of a book because it's from two different perspectives. So you have this white man and then this black woman, and you're talking about the same subject matter and trying to, you know, decipher where we are in this world. And that was a great project. I love that book.
Thank you. It was really meaningful to me for sure, but I think Cynthia felt the same way. I mean, it was a chance to, and when we talked about the Southernization of America, we sort of were saying in 2022 that this could be good news or bad news.
Right.
The bad news is that the South was always the epicenter of racism that sort of, you know, metastasized out from our place in a way, because it was the epicenter of slavery, I think, so it goes all the way back there. On the other hand, it was also the epicenter of the attempt to get past all of that, you know, with the Civil Rights Movement. And so we thought the South of Martin Luther King and John Lewis and Jimmy Carter and, you know, others, that was part of our heritage also. And so we were trying to say that in the book too. It was like hope and a warning in the same book.
Right.
Definitely. Well, I also know that you've written for children.
Right.
And I think that's actually where our paths crossed on the editorial side, because it was Benjamin Sterling Turner, is that correct?
Yes.
Yes, that's the book that you did, The Slave Who Went to Congress, and that's a fascinating story. What's it like to write for children? That seems very challenging to me.
It was extremely challenging to me. I
Such
guess
a heady topic to be able to bring it to a level that they would be able to absorb.
Yeah, and yet it was fascinating to see how easy it was for kids to pick up on that story. Benjamin Sterling Turner was the first African American to serve in Congress from the state of Alabama, and he was elected during Reconstruction in 1870, and his platform was universal amnesty, universal suffrage. And what he meant by that, when he said universal amnesty, he did not want white people, his white constituents, who had fought for the Confederacy to be punished for that. He thought that that we should bind up the wounds of war, as he put it. But universal suffrage meant the right to vote for former slaves. People who had been enslaved, he thought that their citizenship rights were the civic affirmation of their very humanity. And so he didn't want any kind of compromise with that. He wanted full civil rights for formerly enslaved people. He also wanted reparations in the form of land that they could buy at affordable prices so that they could establish an economic base. And so it was almost a kind of Nelson Mandela sort of thing in a way, because he wanted full and equal rights for black people, but he wanted reconciliation between blacks and whites in the South.
And see, that's where I wonder how much children can grasp. And so creating that book, The Slave Who Went to Grown Congress, that was, to me, that seems like it really would have been, like Susie said, it was would have been a hard thing to write for them to grasp and understand, because these are some pretty big topics. I mean, I think they might understand, yes, we want everybody to be able to afford to buy some land, but then also, and I think this was geared more toward, a middle school age?
It was late elementary, early middle school, maybe. One thing that helped was my co-author on that was an elementary school teacher.
Right.
Marty Rosner had the ability to understand how to communicate ideas to younger readers, and I learned a lot from her in the process of doing the book. But I was amazed anyway. I don't know if she was, because she had been a teacher, but I was amazed at how sophisticated the kids were in grasping the nuances of this story. And it kind of didn't matter whether we were in a all-black public school in rural Alabama or an all-white private school on the outskirts of Fairhope, with upper middle class white kids in it. They all were fascinated by the story, and it's a fallacy, I think, that white kids feel bad if you tell them about slavery or something. They loved learning about Benjamin Sterling Turner, and they identified with him as one of the good guys. And so it was just really interesting to see the commonality of responses from kids, because it wasn't about race for them so much. It was about right and wrong. It was about being decent or not.
Right.
So, and kids can understand that.
Yeah, they get that. They definitely do.
Sure.
I want to move on to another book, and we actually have another copy of your other book here, Heroes and Other Mortals, and there's a lot of different people that you talk about there, and I do have to ask on a personal basis, because I love Jimmy Carter, and I know that you actually, what's the word, not acknowledge, but dedicated.
The dedication.
You dedicated the book to him and Rosalind and your wife Nancy.
Right.
So I just, want to know what you can tell us about Jimmy Carter that some people may not realize.
Well, I had the opportunity to write a good bit about Jimmy Carter, starting with the Charlotte Observer, writing about his work with Habitat for Humanity and other things. But I also wrote a short biography of Carter called Prophet from Plains that was an extension of a series that I'd done for the newspaper. And let's see, what are some things people might not know about Carter? I mean, his decency, his desire to make the world better is pretty well known. I think he set the standard for ex-presidents.
Right.
One sort of historian, wag, said Jimmy Carter is the only person to use the presidency as a stepping stone to greatness.
Oh. I mean, he may not have been the best president. He did his best, but I don't think he was, the best president, but he definitely was the best post-president.
I think there's no question about the post-president. And when it came to being president, you could argue that he was pretty good at deciding what was a good thing to do. I mean, the Camp David Accords between Israel and Egypt was an amazing achievement, and Carter's own strength of personality was key to that. It would not have happened if not for Carter's personal one-on-one diplomacy with the heads of state of those two countries. The fact that he brought all of the hostages, the U.S. diplomats who were taken hostage by Iran, his diplomacy brought them all home alive. It not as quickly as Americans wanted, and so that may have in fact cost him his job. What Carter wasn't very good at it as president, I think most people would agree, is sort of selling his ideas to the American people. In fact, he wasn't even very interested in that. He sort of thought that they'll sell themselves, these policies.
Well, in a way that kind of surprises me because, you know, he was a spokesperson. I mean, he was a preacher, you know, and so if you can get up and sell religion at the pulpit every Sunday, well, I guess he didn't preach every Sunday, but I do know, you know, you got to get up there and sell it to the crowd, whether it's somebody in a congregation or, you know, somebody across America on the plains trying to figure out what your, you know, new policy you're trying to. So that kind of surprises me that he was not successful at that.
You know, Carter had this, it was interesting, he was an incredibly effective communicator to small groups of people. You put him in a room with a dozen people, 100 people, 200 people, he was mesmerizing.
Right.
But put him in front of a teleprompter, in front of a political convention, and like he had a more wooden presence for whatever reason. And you know, it was just a flaw in his political skill set, I think, but it was not a flaw in his heart. You know, it was not a flaw in his wisdom. I mean, he's one of the most impressively intelligent people I've ever had a chance to talk to. He was low key. He was unpretentious. He was accessible. You know, he was not threatened by tough questions. In fact, he seemed to enjoy them.
You know who I feel like Frye is describing is himself.
That's true.
I mean, because Frye, you're very unassuming and you're very easily accessible, and you've done some.
And you know, so many people have been in contact with them. Like we'll be sitting around talking or at dinner, and you know, I'll say, hey, you know, I really admire, you know, so and so. Oh yeah.
It's like,
I've interviewed that person, or I was in a car with that person for a while.
Exactly.
There's always a story. It's awesome. Yeah.
It's you know, journalism is a great profession for that.
It sure is.
You wind up having a chance to talk to some really, really interesting people.
I mean, because Susan, look at us, who we're talking to now.
Well, that's true.
And look at me.
That's kind.
You blush.
Well, all right. So this year you were inducted into the Alabama Writers Hall of Fame.
Congratulations.
Yes, congratulations. That's awesome.
That's a big deal.
So what is it like now to be this influential writer in Alabama, telling all the youngins what to do?
You know, that was a huge honor to be inducted into the Alabama Writers Hall of Fame. I mean, there's so many amazing writers that this state has produced. I mean, Harper Lee comes first to mind, but you know, Ralph Ellison, you know, went to Tuskegee and wrote Invisible Man. You know, Albert Murray. I mean, just on and on. Truman Capote. So many really famous writers. But you know, some that are one step down from that in fame. You know, Tom Franklin, Daniel Wallace, you know, Joy Harjo. I mean, they're you know, barely one step down in fame. I mean, these are great writers, and so to be, you know, mentioned in the same breath with them is you know, I can't see a downside.
No, definitely not.
Well, do people just start introducing you like that now instead of like, here is Oscar winning Susan Reynolds? Did they introduce you as, Alabama Writers Hall of Fame inductee Frye Gaillard?
No.
Well, they should.
They should.
I mean, we did. We said that
That's
at your
good.
intro.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, you did, and thank you.
You're welcome. We're going to say it all the time. Just
You know-
like, by the way, people, he mentioned Notasulga, and there is a Frye Gaillard Day in Notasulga, and we celebrate every year. So we're always going to celebrate your induction in the Hall of Fame. I think that's fantastic.
Well, thank you very much.
I think you should have it on your business card,
Well, if I had a business card.
See, he's so important, he doesn't need a
one.
business card.
Exactly.
Well, Frye, we've really enjoyed this conversation, but we have reached the part of our interview where we like to ask you a few more questions in our
Okay.
before you go segment. So these
Okay.
are a little bit more lighthearted.
Okay.
And
Fair enough.
they can be rapid fire, so it can be quick answers.
Okay.
But I've got to start. So you went to Vandy.
I did.
You're from Alabama.
Why did I defect?
No. I want to know. I mean, Vandy's a good school. I give you that. I have no problem with you going to Vandy. But I just want to know, when the two teams play football, which one do you root for?
It's easy. I have to root for my alma mater,
Mhm.
which means that I have rooted in vain most of the time for the last 60 years. But
So you are super happy now that Vandy has finally beaten Alabama.
Alabama, it's happened 3 times in my lifetime.
Wow.
So,
Nice. Okay, 3 times the charm. It's not going to happen again.
it may not. It did not this year. So, we were hoping, but no, it was, revenge was sweet for the Tide this year.
Oh,
I
we
think.
have friends who are Commodores, and we actually know somebody who was the actual mascot for the Commodores, and so we text him all the time. It's
Oh,
like,
good. Yeah.
congratulations
Yeah.
for
Well,
once.
Oh
That's
my
funny.
goodness. Well, all right. If you had one song that you could listen to, and only one song, what would it be?
Oh my goodness, what would that be? One song.
That's a hard
It
question.
is a hard
That
question.
is a hard question.
Or you
Uh,
could say one book that you could only.
Well, I mean, let me do the song. Maybe the thing that popped first to mind in these times is the Woody Guthrie song, "This Land Is My Land."
Mm-hmm.
And I think the reason for that is that was a protest song.
Mhm.
It's been done so often that it can lose its punch.
Right.
But he was a guy writing out of the migrant labor fields in California, saying this is our land
Mhm.
too. And so the idea that America belongs to a lot of us, that we are a diverse, both economically, racially, ethnically, religiously, all of those things. And so I think celebrating an America that makes room for all of us, a song that does that in these times, that was the song that popped immediately in
Yeah.
mind. There's so many. I love
Yeah.
music. I've written a lot.
Well, that's a great answer.
Yeah.
So.
It is a great answer.
Okay, Frye. Does pineapple belong on pizza? He's
Lisa,
worried to offend someone.
I don't want to offend people who like pineapple, but
Look, people are strong on this. They're either for it or against it.
I know. I would come down on the negative side, but I have friends who like pineapple.
I got
So,
That question was actually asked to me today at physical therapy.
Nice.
Yeah, they have-
what
What
did
was
you
your
say?
answer?
I said no. They have a tally going, and so
Yeah.
far the no's have won.
See, I like
Yeah.
Hawaiian pizza with ham and
Okay.
so I'll eat it.
I,
Look, if
You're
you see my girth, you can tell
Stop.
that I like all foods.
Stop.
So there's very few foods I won't eat. Okay. Next.
Next. All right. What is your favorite room in your house?
favorite room in my
Mhm.
house. I have a room it's my living room really, but it has French doors with glass, so I can look out, sit on my couch and look out at Fowl River, this beautiful tidal river that flows past my house. and there's a marsh right in front of me, and there are always, great blue herons or egrets, and there are pelicans fishing in the river, and there's an osprey nest in a tree right outside, all of that. So that's my favorite room because I can see out.
So why did we have you drive to Tuscaloosa for this podcast? Why didn't we go to that room and have the podcast?
Next time? Next
okay,
time.
part
Right.
2, all right? Okay, Frye, have you ever asked anyone for their autograph?
Oh,
You have met so many people. Have you ever asked for an autograph?
I'm trying to think. I'm not sure that I ever have. Let me think.
You just hung out with them and wrote
Well,
books about them.
I was, if I met somebody that was famous enough to want their autograph, it was unseemly because I was on the job. I was
Right.
working,
Right.
and
But
so
you're not on the job now.
no. So can I have your autograph?
Yes,
Okay.
we've already gotten yours for our poster. I'll give you mine now.
Okay, good.
About that.
That works. Yes.
Okay,
Good.
perfect.
Excellent. All right. So, do you prefer a moon pie or a king cake?
Oh, I'm a king cake guy.
Same.
Yeah.
Okay,
Same.
that's fair. What's one thing that most people don't know about you?
Let's see. What would that be?
Something that you're willing to share in a G-rated podcast.
G-rated podcast.
It's probably more of a PG-13 rated podcast.
Yeah. Well, I got to interview Linda Ronstadt one time.
Oh.
No way.
Yeah, and that was, she and I are roughly the same age.
Okay.
And when I interviewed her, I thought she was the most beautiful woman on earth.
Everybody says that.
And so when she agreed to the interview, it was like, I had to sort of get a grip.
Yeah, you were starstruck.
I was totally starstruck. So, but it was a good interview because she is so smart
Yeah.
and was, again, really accessible and kind and easy to talk to. I felt a little embarrassed that I had been so starstruck by her beauty that I almost overlooked sort of the depth of character and intelligence and all that,
Right.
except that you couldn't once
Right.
you started talking to her. So maybe people don't
Yeah.
know that I once interviewed Linda Ronstadt.
I heard
That's
Oprah
awesome.
Winfrey say the same thing about Michael Jackson.
That's interesting. I
She-
don't doubt that.
Yeah, she said that she regrets her interview with Michael Jackson because she was so starstruck that excuse me, that there were several things that she wanted to ask him, but it just never came up. Or
Yes.
she just, her mind was not with her body at the same time
Yeah.
because she was just so starstruck. So I can see that happening.
Well,
Well, I got a little stage fright when you came on this podcast, so I'm going to admit that. That's why everything I have is written down, so I won't forget anything.
Right. Oh my gosh.
You don't need to be.
Well, all right. Last question. What is something you're grateful for?
I'm grateful for a lot of things. I'm grateful for the family that I had, my late wife Nancy, my 2 daughters, Rachel and Tracy, grandkids, all of that kind of stuff, but also grateful for the opportunity to be a writer and to do it in this state, where there's so much to write about, where the human condition is on full display in the state of Alabama, I think, with all that implies. Some really heroic dimensions to it and sometimes some ugly dimensions to it. You can find all of that here, and then a lot of stuff in between.
Definitely.
Excellent. Well, Frye, thank you so much. This has been really a good conversation. We appreciate you joining us.
Thank you so much.
And we want to thank our guest, Frye Gaillard, for being our guest on Coffee and History, a conversation with Alabama Heritage. You can find our podcasts wherever you listen and also watch us on our YouTube channel. Then you know what we look like. Don't forget that if you want to subscribe to our magazine, we're quarterly, and you can log on to alabamaheritage.com. It also makes a great gift, so think about that. Until next time, thanks for listening, but first, I think I need more coffee. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.